Bill Murray, Sandra Day O'Connor, and Benedict Arnold are all on this day. Welcome back to On This Day. Today's date is September 21st, 2022. It is the 264th day of the year. There are 101 days left in 2022. It's the 38th Wednesday in the 38th week and the 93rd day of summer. Tomorrow is fall. Today is National New York Day. Yes, not the city, but the state. September 21st brings us to National New York Day, honoring the Empire State. The Lenape people populated the land now known as New York. They're also known as Delaware Indians. To be fair, their settlements also went into New Jersey and Pennsylvania and parts of Delaware and Connecticut. However, the Dutch were the first Europeans to settle the area and named it New Netherland. Settlements and trading posts developed up and down the Hudson River, and in 1624 the Dutch established a settlement on what is now known as Governor's Island. 2 years later they would move to Manhattan Island and the colony flourished. Over time the settlement exchanged hands between the Dutch and the British several times, each without bloodshed, which is kind of cool. The first exchange in 1664 would name it New York. After declaring its independence, the colonies later created the Articles of Confederation. So yeah, that was the beginning, and now we have New York Day. All right, let's see what else September 21st has given us. 1776, part of New York City is burned shortly after being occupied by British forces. So this is 100 years after the Dutch and British exchanged the territory without bloodshed. 100 years later, changes things, they start killing each other. Not the Dutch, the Americans. 1780, Benedict Arnold gives the British the plans to West Point. I've talked about him before. He was a piece of work. And I know we've gone over this and I've said it, but in case you missed that, Benedict Arnold not only was a turncoat against the Americans, he also moved up to Canada after he was essentially chased out of the United States and basically became a tax collector, a horrible landlord, and did some sort of collection agency type thing back in the day. So he eventually had to leave Canada and ended up in England, where I think he kind of laid low. 1938, the Great Hurricane of 1938 makes landfall on Long Island, New York. We've got a lot of New York stuff going on today. The death toll is estimated at 500 to 700 people. 1942, the Holocaust in Ukraine. On the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, Nazis send over 1,000 Jews to the Briggs extermination camp. Sorry if I mispronounced that. My Polish isn't that good. 1964, the North American XB-70 Valkyrie, the world's fastest bomber, makes its maiden flight from Palmdale, California. This was an impressive aircraft. Sadly, they were doing a photo op with it one time, and they had a mid-air collision. They had all these planes lined up flying next to each other, all these fighter jets along with the bomber, and as they were about to break off after their little mid-air photo shoot, one of the planes lost control. They're not sure what happened because that pilot died, and he ran into the Valkyrie, which took off part of the wing and made it go into a basically death spin. 2 pilots died from that. It was sad. 1976, Orlando Letelier is assassinated in Washington, D.C. because he had been a member of the former Chilean Marxist government. So this is a really strange one. This man used to be the ambassador to Chile like 3 years prior. Now he was living in the United States working for a think tank, basically a civilian. The new Chilean government was a Marxist government, and the new dictator didn't like what he was doing and his politics, so he basically backed the assassination of this man. Now, at the time, Orlando didn't think that anything like this could happen to him in the United States. He thought he was totally safe, so he didn't take any real precautions. But the Chilean secret police got a hold of some Cuban Americans that planted a bomb underneath this man's seat. While he was going to work one day with 2 American citizens he worked with, Ronnie Moffett and her husband Michael Moffett, they didn't realize that there was a car following them that had the 2 Cuban Americans that had planted the bomb. As he rounded Sheridan Circle on what is known as Embassy Row on Massachusetts Avenue, not far from where he used to live in the Chilean ambassador residence, they ignited the bomb. Michael Moffett was the only one that survived. 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor is unanimously approved by the U.S. Senate as the first female Supreme Court justice. 2001, A Tribute to Heroes is broadcast by over 35 networks and cable channels, raising over $200 million for the victims of the September 11th attacks. Premiered on September 21st, Into the Wild. This was a great movie from a true story in a book. A top athlete and student who recently graduated from college abandons his possessions and savings to live in the wilderness, where he meets a series of characters who shape his life. Sean Penn wrote and directed the film. This movie is based on the travels of Christopher McCandless, who had hitchhiked his way to Alaska, on like a self-discovery thing and find himself in the wild. And that's the name of the book and the movie. Basically, this kid didn't know much about living off the land or anything like that. He took off with a 10-pound bag of rice, some books, a rifle with about 400 rounds of ammunition, and went into the Alaskan outback. He had hiked up a trail for quite some distance and down a road and crossed a river. Finally found a clearing where he thought he'd set up a base camp and get ready for his trek across Alaska into the Bering Sea. In the clearing was a bus that was left there when workers had built a road, and they kind of used it as a mobile shelter back in the day. Well, he did the same thing, and he set up camp there, and he kind of trekked around to see how far into the woods he was willing to go. Well, he had been hunting squirrel and actually killed a moose at one point, and he didn't know what to do with it. He tried to cure the meat, but it spoiled before he had a chance, and he started to realize that he was in over his head, and he really didn't know what he was doing. After 2 months in isolation and running out of rice, he decided to head back down the trail, go back into town, and back to civilization. Problem was, that river that he had walked across was now a raging river, and he couldn't get back to civilization. He was kind of hosed. There was no bridge. He didn't know where there might be a bridge. And as he became weaker from lack of food, it made it harder for him to actually go out and try and find food. Eventually, he died of starvation. We know all this because he had a pretty good diary that he was keeping track of things the whole time he was in the bus, and even before that. He basically did a diary throughout his travels. Very interesting and sad story. Born on September 21st, 1950, Bill Murray, comedian and actor who was nominated for an Academy Award for his starring role in the 2003 film Lost in Translation. He is best known for films like Caddyshack, Ghostbusters, Groundhog Day, Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, St. Vincent, and the Royal Tenenbaums. He was also on Saturday Night Live. He's been in everything. In his youth, he worked as a golf caddy to fund his high school education. He began taking pre-med courses at Regis University in Denver, Colorado, but dropped out. He's a very strange man. I don't think he has an agent. People just call him and ask him if he'd like to be in films, and he just shows up. But one of the most interesting things about him are these urban legends about him that apparently are true. He just shows up places and hangs out with people. He was walking through Central Park, saw a bunch of young adults playing kickball, and asked if he could join. So there's this great picture of him with all these young people that got done playing kickball. There's stories of him going to college parties. This one guy goes in the kitchen to get a beer, and there's Bill Murray doing the dishes. And they're all, "Are you Bill Murray?" He's all, "Yeah." And he's all, "How are you doing the dishes?" And he's all, "Somebody has to do the dishes." And it's just, he's a very, very strange man. There's a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, about Bill Murray sightings. It's really interesting. Died on September 21st. Willie Garson, movie actor who appeared in many mainstream films, including Labor Pains, and played a role on HBO's Sex and the City. In 2009, he began starring as Mozzie in White Collar. Now, he's a very interesting character, and I liked him in just about everything he did. Character in Sex and the City, his name was Stanford. He played a gay man that was friends with the main character in it, and his exploits are hysterical. One of my favorite things was he decided to try an app for, or I think it was just a personal thing, to meet a man, and he was gay, and they were going to meet on this corner and go out, and he's all excited, and the guy walks up to him, looks at him, and goes, "Are you Stanford?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm Stanford." And he's smiling, and the guy goes, "Yeah, this isn't going to happen," and walks away from him. But he seemed to play gay characters quite often, and he was straight. Sadly, he died on September 21st, 2021 from pancreatic cancer. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a productive day, and be nice to each other.